Most people are taught a simple rule about money. If you want to be financially secure, you need to save more, spend less than you earn, be disciplined, avoid unnecessary risk, and over time, your savings will grow into something meaningful. It sounds responsible, it sounds rational, and for a long time, it actually worked. But the world that made this advice effective no longer exists in the same way. Today, relying on saving alone is no longer enough to build wealth. In fact, for many people, it may quietly be the reason they never get ahead financially. Not because saving is wrong, but because saving, by itself, is incomplete. To understand why, you have to look at how the financial environment has changed over time. There was a period when saving money was a powerful strategy. Prices were relatively stable. Wages were increasing. Interest rates were high enough that simply putting money in a bank account could generate meaningful returns. In that environment, saving was not just about protection. It was a way to grow wealth steadily and predictably. But that environment has changed. Interest rates, for long periods, have been relatively low. Inflation, even when it appears moderate, continues to erode purchasing power, and the cost of major life expenses, housing, healthcare, education, has increased significantly faster than income in many parts of the world. This creates a gap between what people expect saving to do and what it actually does. Because when your savings grow at a slower rate than inflation, something important happens. Your money stays the same, but its value does not. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in personal finance. Inflation is not always visible in a dramatic way. It does not feel like a sudden loss. Instead, it works slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. But over long periods of time, it compounds. What you could afford 10 years ago is not what you can afford today. What your savings can support in the future will not match what you assume now. And that creates a hidden form of financial erosion. This is the first limitation of saving. It protects your money from immediate loss, but it does not necessarily protect your future purchasing power. And in a world where costs continue to rise, that distinction matters more than ever. But there is another limitation that is even more fundamental. Saving money depends on income. You earn money, you spend less than you earn, and you store the difference. Which means your ability to save is directly linked to how much you make. And for most people, income is tied to time. You trade hours for money. You increase income by working more, improving skills, or advancing your career. But there are natural limits to how far this can go. There are only so many hours in a day, only so much energy you can sustain, only so many opportunities available within your field. This creates a ceiling. No matter how disciplined you are, there is a limit to how much you can save from income alone. And for many people, that limit arrives sooner than expected. At the same time, life becomes more complex over time. Expenses increase, responsibilities grow, unexpected events occur. A job loss, a health issue, a family obligation. Any of these can disrupt the ability to save consistently. And when saving becomes inconsistent, progress slows even further. This is why many people feel stuck financially. They are doing everything they were told to do. They are working hard, they are being responsible, they are saving what they can. But despite all of that effort, their financial position does not improve in a meaningful way. Because the system they are relying on was designed for a different economic reality. It was designed for stability. But we are now operating in an environment that rewards growth, adaptability, and strategic positioning. To understand what is missing, you need to shift your perspective. Saving is about preservation. Wealth is about growth. And growth requires a different mechanism. That mechanism is assets. Assets behave differently from savings. Savings remain static. They hold value, but they do not actively generate it. Assets, on the other hand, have the potential to increase in value, produce income, and compound over time. And, most importantly, they are not directly tied to your time. This is a critical distinction. When your financial progress depends entirely on your effort, it grows in a linear way. You put in more effort, you get slightly more output. But when your progress is connected to assets, the growth can become exponential. Returns generate returns. Gains build on gains. Over time, the difference becomes substantial. This is why two people with similar incomes can end up in completely different financial positions. One focuses only on saving. The other focuses on acquiring and managing assets. At the beginning, their situations may look almost identical. They earn similar amounts. They spend similarly. They save at comparable rates. But over time, their paths begin to diverge. The person who relies only on saving experiences slow, incremental progress. The person who invests in assets begins to benefit from compounding. And as the years pass, the gap between them widens. Not because one works harder, but because one is participating in a different system. This is the power of compounding. Compounding is not just about earning returns. It is about reinvesting those returns so that they generate additional returns. It is a process that accelerates over time. In the early stages, it may seem insignificant, but given enough time, it becomes the dominant force in wealth creation. And saving alone does not fully activate this process. Another important factor to consider is time. Time amplifies the effects of both good and bad financial decisions. When you combine time with compounding, even small differences in strategy can lead to vastly different outcomes. This is why starting early is so important. Not because you save more money, but because you give your investments more time to grow. Every year that passes without investing is a year of lost compounding. And that loss cannot be fully recovered later. This is one of the most overlooked realities in personal finance. People focus on how much they invest, but they underestimate the importance of when they start. Starting earlier, even with smaller amounts, can be more powerful than starting later with larger contributions. But despite these advantages, many people hesitate to move beyond saving. And the reason is simple. Saving feels safe. It provides a sense of certainty and control. You know where your money is. You can access it easily. Its value does not fluctuate dramatically from day to day. Investing, on the other hand, introduces uncertainty. Markets move. Prices change. Outcomes are not guaranteed. And for many people, this uncertainty is uncomfortable. So they avoid it. They choose the familiarity of saving, even if it limits their long-term potential. This is not a mistake in logic. It is a response to human psychology. People are naturally risk-averse. They prefer avoiding losses over pursuing gains. But avoiding all risk creates a different kind of risk. The risk of stagnation, the risk of falling behind, the risk of never reaching financial independence. In today's economic environment, doing nothing carries its own consequences. This does not mean that taking reckless risks is the solution. It means understanding the difference between unmanaged risk and strategic risk. Unmanaged risk is random. It is based on speculation without understanding. Strategic risk is calculated. It is based on knowledge, diversification, and long-term thinking. The goal is not to eliminate risk completely. It is to manage it in a way that allows for growth while maintaining stability. This is where a balanced financial approach becomes important. Saving provides liquidity and security. Investing provides growth and opportunity. Both are necessary, but relying on only one creates imbalance, and imbalance limits progress. Another important shift that many people fail to recognize is the changing nature of work itself. Careers are no longer as stable as they once were. Industries evolve quickly. Technology disrupts existing roles. Job security is less predictable. This makes income less certain over long periods of time. And if your entire financial strategy depends on income, that uncertainty becomes a major vulnerability. Assets, on the other hand, can provide an additional layer of stability. They can generate income independent of your job. They can appreciate even when your personal income does not. They can act as a buffer against economic changes. This is why asset ownership is becoming increasingly important, not just as a way to grow wealth, but as a way to create resilience. Because in an unpredictable environment, flexibility matters. The ability to adapt, to generate income from multiple sources, and to participate in growth opportunities becomes a significant advantage. But beyond all of these structural and financial factors, there is one more element that plays a crucial role. Mindset. The way people think about money shapes the decisions they make. And for many people, that mindset is still rooted in an outdated model. They believe that working harder will always lead to better financial outcomes. They believe that saving diligently will eventually be enough. They believe that stability is the ultimate goal. But in a changing system, these assumptions need to be reevaluated, because the environment no longer rewards the same behaviors in the same way. Today, Financial progress requires a broader understanding. It requires awareness of how money moves, how systems operate, how opportunities are created, and how risks can be managed effectively. Once this awareness develops, the questions begin to change. Instead of asking, "How much can I save?" you begin to ask, "How can my money grow?" Instead of focusing only on income, you start thinking about ownership. Instead of prioritizing comfort, you begin to consider long-term positioning. And these shifts in thinking lead to different actions. Over time, those actions compound. And that is where meaningful change occurs. Saving money is still an essential part of financial stability. It provides a foundation. It creates a safety net. It allows you to handle short-term uncertainty, but it is not a complete strategy for building wealth. Without growth, stability eventually becomes limitation, and limitation prevents expansion. The goal is not to stop saving. It is to integrate saving into a larger, more comprehensive approach, one that includes investing, learning, adapting, and evolving. Because wealth is not created through a single action. It is built through a system of decisions, applied consistently over time, and the effectiveness of that system depends on how well it aligns with reality. The reality today is that the financial environment has changed, and strategies must change with it. The biggest mistake is not saving too little. It is relying on a single strategy in a system that requires multiple approaches, because when you rely on only one method, you limit your potential. You restrict your growth, and you reduce your ability to adapt. But once you recognize this, everything begins to shift. You start to see opportunities where you once saw uncertainty. You begin to think in terms of positioning rather than just accumulation. And you move from a passive approach to a more intentional one. That shift is what separates stagnation from progress. Because in the end, wealth is not defined by how much you save. It is defined by how effectively you use what you have. And using it effectively requires more than discipline. It requires strategy, it requires awareness, and it requires the willingness to move beyond what feels safe. That is where real financial growth begins.